designed to make its control permanent. Russia has pursued this objective through several mutually reinforcing mechanisms rather than through one linear process. First, Russia has pursued the objective of reproducing the Russian state inside of occupied Ukraine by establishing key institutions there. It has replicated much of its federal administrative architecture across the occupied territories, seeking their full legal, economic, political, and administrative integration into Russia. In 2025, Russia has also finalized the integration of the occupied regional administrations into federal digital monitoring platform, the governor's dashboard. This allows the Kremlin to monitor budgets, personal performance, construction projects, and administrative compliance in real time, placing occupied territories under the same performance metrics and digital oversight mechanisms as those used in Russia. Second, since 2022, Russia has also isolated occupied territories from the Ukrainian information space, promoted Russian-controlled applications and information channels, and tightened control over communications and online activity. Third, the Kremlin has expanded coercive passportization measures, linking access to basic services, employment, and property rights to Russian citizenship, while also increasingly using citizenship status to facilitate military registration and mobilization in occupied territories. Fourth, Moscow has also focused on the systematic erasure of Ukrainian identity across education, media, culture, and public life, while simultaneously replacing it with Russian ideology, culture, language, and historical pro-Russian narratives. Russia banned the Ukrainian language in schools, removed Ukrainian books, and hindered access to Ukrainian remote education opportunities. Moscow has also imposed militarized education programs, youth organizations such as Yunarmia, Voin, Movement of the First, and increasingly used cultural institutions, patriotic websites, and digital platforms to reinforce pro-Russian historical narratives and cultivate hostility not just towards Ukraine, but towards the United States and overall West. Fifth, the Kremlin has also increasingly focused on demographic engineering. While Ukrainians have faced forced mobilization, property confiscations, and employment challenges, Moscow has offered high salaries, subsidized mortgages, and relocation incentives to Russian teachers, doctors, cultural workers, and other specialists willing to move into occupied areas. Sixth, the Kremlin has also developed an extractive and militarized economic model, combining resource extraction with the systematic reorientation of local industry towards Russia's defense industrial base. So occupation authorities have increasingly combined violence with technological tools that serve as an effective force multiplier and enabler for deepening residents' dependence on occupation institutions and further entrenching their control. The occupation authorities have implemented a preventive threat elimination approach, assuming basic civilian disloyalty and treating every passive dissent as a potential security threat. Digital surveillance has been increasingly used alongside policing, including checkpoints and filtration procedures. And this also includes monitoring communications, the Russian-controlled Max Super app, mandatory biometric SIM registration, CCTV cameras, and efforts to identify any used unregistered phones by the local population. Phones are routinely searched at checkpoints and during unannounced home raids. Possessing Ukrainian media content, following Ukrainian news or pro-Ukrainian Telegram channels, or even having a VPN installed can lead to detention, torture, disappearance, or transfer to filtration sites or prisons. Between 22 and 25, around 15,000 people were detained, although the number might be significantly higher as of today. Also, passportization illustrates how technology and coercion go hand in hand. Residents were pressured to accept Russian citizenship because basic services, employment, communications, and property rights increasingly depended on it. Once inside the system, they became more visible to Russian administrative databases, military registration systems, and other mechanisms of state control. So to conclude, Russia's occupation system is designed to make Russian rule permanent. It does so through administrative coercion and integration, passportization, indoctrination, surveillance, and demographic engineering, with technology serving as a false multiplier and enabler, making control more efficient and future integration with Ukraine virtually impossible. Thank you, and I look forward to the discussion.
Great. Thank you so much. Well, I want to thank the Helsinki Commission for organizing this important briefing, and I appreciate the invitation to participate. So what I would like to do to complement what we've heard so far is to present a bit of context and a broader overview about the evolution of Russia's digital controls and how that is now currently being applied in the context of the Ukrainian occupied territories. I think an important aspect is that, first of all, many, if not all, the tactics that are being employed in the occupied territories borrow from Russia's repression playbook being used at home. And that what we've seen is a gradual evolution over time when it comes to increasing constraints within Russia's own information ecosystem. In other words, what we're looking at in Russia as compared to another authoritarian state like China is not something that has been uniformly repressive over a 1 or 2 decade period. Instead, what we've seen is intensification. And that intensification has been linked to the centralization of authority by Russia's President Vladimir Putin. So as Putin has closed down and cracked down politically in the country, we've also seen a commensurate clamping down when it comes to information controls, when it comes to platform bans, when it comes to the imposition of surveillance. And, you know, in many respects, I think an interesting kind of point of comparison with China is that you both see increasing levels, if not consistent levels, of material support coming from Beijing, but you also see a modeling effect taking place where increasingly the types of tactics employed in Moscow and other cities and now in the occupied territories borrows from a similar playbook to one that Beijing has used, both in terms of mainland China, but also in Xinjiang. So I think that's something to bear in mind as well. One of the things that I think is important to recognize on the surveillance front in terms of what we've seen in Russia is that you have over 21 million surveillance cameras that are currently in the country being used, among the tops in the world. You have a number of safe cities. Moscow itself has over 217,000 surveillance cameras, many of which are now powered by biometric facial recognition technology, and that's something that can be weaponized as needed. So even prior to the war, what we were starting to see already, especially in Moscow's metro, where you use face pay as a way to purchase a ticket, is a linkage between different types of ordinary transactions, commercial transactions, and the ability for that to then be weaponized by authorities as part of a vast surveillance system. And as Russia has gone to war, as conscription is something that has come into place, we then see authorities using that face pay system to identify people who are flagged in the system for having evaded conscription so that they're then picked up. So there's a very kind of, I think, important linkage between sort of ordinary systems that maybe initially were put in place and viewed as increasing efficiencies when it comes to providing public services with a weaponization that is very much linked to the political crackdown that is ongoing and intensifying in Russia. And of course, it's not just surveillance cameras, it's everything from public Wi-Fi, which is also being used as a tool of mass surveillance, as well as the updating of its